Hi everyone. So I realized that last video I did made me look like I was in a cave. Not that you really need to see my face for this. I think the important thing is my words. Sometimes you don't need to hear those either. Thanks for hanging in there. Anyway, I got a little light situation set up right now, and I'm hoping it won't fall on top of me. But if it does, that would make an exciting summary lecture, wouldn't it? Okay. I actually think this one is going to be kind of short. I hope. I hope. Fingers crossed. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so this week you have one reading on branding, just branding in general, and then you have another reading, which is actually an academic study on self-branding. So let me just sort of lay out my logic here. Really, what I think this class should be about to some extent is all about self-branding. Like, it's all about impression management online, which I do think is synonymous with self-branding. But first, I think it's good to understand what branding is. Now, you already started talking about it last week when we started thinking about micro-celebrity influencers and what is their brand? Like, what is it that they're trying to sell as far as the impression of themselves? But I was like, let's give like a little bit of a history of branding to sort of put it in perspective. Because as I've mentioned before, right, it used to be that like the only people who had to worry about branding, or marketing agencies, like products were branded. Uh, Chobani, I'm so bad at this. Chobani had to worry about branding. Still has to worry about branding, I get it. But now, right, we live in a time when we have to worry about branding because we are, oh, somebody's calling me. Hold on, let me just, hey, I'm doing a video right now.
Okay, well, talk to you later, I guess.
Bye. Authentic moments, that's what it's all about. Where was I? Okay, so we live in a time now where it's not just like people who have a product to sell have to worry about branding. We all have to worry about branding because we are all broadcasting ourselves, right? In some level, we're trying to market ourselves. And I keep mentioning this. I don't necessarily think marketing yourself is only relevant for people who are trying to get a job or trying to, I don't know, do some sort of image transformation or have a comeback or whatever. I think that even if you don't even have something specifically in mind that you're trying to get, right, it behooves us to think about what is the brand that we're trying to put out there. Okay, so more on the self-branding in a second. Let's just talk about what branding is. So as you've probably read by now, right, when you talk about branding cattle, yeah, that's exactly the type of brand that we're talking about when we talk about marketing too, because historically people would brand their cattle or other sorts of, I don't know, maybe there's other types of livestock that they would brand. My husband, I told you about the chickens, he wants to get like a little stamp to have on our eggs. I think that's a little much, but I was like, you can get a stamp for the carton, but it's possible maybe people would brand their eggs or something like that. And look, this was a way, the branding served two purposes. One is so in the case of cattle, people knew whose cattle it was. But what ended up happening is that they started to associate a different type of quality with a different type of brand, right? Oh, that meat tastes better and it has this brand on it, right? The mark came to signify something about the quality of the meat. People could distinguish different types of cow. Maybe shouldn't make it just about meat. Maybe it's milk too. But the point is people could come to distinguish different types of experiences that are associated with different brands or different emblems and things like that. And that's not to say that a brand has to be a symbol. It doesn't. But you'll notice that symbols are often associated with brands because that's the signifier, right? When you see that symbol, that's how you start feeling those feelings you have for that brand. That's how you know just heuristically that you're going to get the experience you want, right? And then, of course, later on, it became more, it obviously went up beyond cattle, and it wasn't just about people just being able to find their cows, right? People recognized the power of being able to distinguish themselves. And I should say that in today's marketplace, and I mean today's marketplace, starting probably around the 1950s, branding became particularly important because we started having more people selling the exact same things. I mean, think about this. How many like laundry detergents are there in a typical supermarket aisle? And then ask yourself, are any of those products really different? Like, if you were to use any of those, if you were to use any of those laundry detergents, would your clothes not be clean? Whereas if you used one, they would be, right? No, we live in a time right now where you could probably take any laundry detergent off the shelf and be assured that your clothes were going to get cleaned. So the point, though, is that we don't always buy things just because the product's supposed to do what it's supposed to do. And if I am a laundry detergent manufacturer, I have to make myself distinguishable based on something more than my ability to get clothes clean. I need to offer some different type of experience, some sort of different promise. Maybe that it's going to be some particular smell or something like that. Like, oh, I associate myself with rivers and valleys, and this guy, he associates himself with beaches and coves. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's got to be something to distinguish you so that the consumer can decide. And as a consumer, if everything's going to get my clothes clean, there needs to be something else for me to latch onto. And that's what branding is about. That's why you think about different things when you see Tide versus when you see Method. I use Method for everything else, but not laundry detergent. That's interesting. I'll have to think about that. Anyway, so branding's important, but I do want to make it clear that branding is not a logo. Branding is an experience, right? Branding is a cue that you can trust that if you buy this product, you know that you're going to be able to get whatever experience is associated with the brand. Now, like I said, branding always has different types of logos and images and colors and taglines. Like, all of those things are part of the branding process. But what those things are supposed to do is not the branding itself. They're the things that are supposed to cue the consumer that this is what we're offering here, right? This is our package. Some of the, I would say, like, better brands, if we can say that weren't mentioned in that reading. That reading was so old, by the way. It was like 2003, but that's kind of why I loved it, because I was like, look, back in 2003, this is how we were talking about brands, and I don't think much has changed. But some brands that have become, I would say, more strong since 2003 is like Apple. Like, think about Apple and what it connotes, right? There are feelings that we get when we see the Apple logo. Even if you're not an Apple user, this is important, because maybe you don't like Apple for some reason because of what it represents. But the point is consistency. You know that when you walk into an Apple store, you're going to get a certain type of experience, right? You're going to get, I don't know, what would Apple say? Innovation, right? People dancing around with their iPods. I don't know. Apple worked really hard to have a lot of control over that brand, right? They don't, I remember Apple, when it first came out, when they first started manufacturing like the iPhone and things like that, I was surprised that there weren't like a lot of color options or anything like that. And I think that was done deliberately. They didn't want to give a lot of options in terms of how people could like decorate their cases or colors that they could order their computers in or anything like that, because, right, they wanted some brand consistency, and they wanted everything to look sleek and in a certain way to, again, help convey that sort of like futuristic feel or whatever that they wanted to have. And I don't know what Apple's brand is, but I guess my point is like, even if I can't articulate it, we all kind of know what an Apple product is and what we expect from it, even if it doesn't deliver. Thanks for that, Tim Cook. I'm being mean. I really don't care that much. My husband does, but I don't. Okay, so moving right along, personal branding is the same. Again, branding isn't necessarily about a product anyway, right? It's about an experience, and you can have the same thing on your social media accounts, right? It's about, what is it? What are the promises that you sort of give that when people come to see you on social media, that you're going to get? What kind of experience, what kind of feelings will interaction with you lead? To me, that is what self-branding is. I've heard the term emotional branding before, and I don't think it's any different, but actually when I teach branding to my undergraduates, I actually use the term emotional branding instead of branding, because I want to convey that idea of effective reaction so strongly. I want them to realize that branding is about trying to cultivate a type of emotion or effective experience anytime somebody encounters something associated with your brand. And the same thing can happen when we cultivate our person on social media. Now, I have heard in the past that some people think like the whole idea is kind of fake and like, oh, pichu, I've got a brand, I've got a personal, which I totally get. And I think there are a lot of people like that, right? When people are actually like talking about like, well, I'm not going to post that because it's not consistent with my brand. I mean, they're a little high on themselves. But I look at it as something that happens organically, whether you're trying to do it or not. And not only that, but I think the idea that like if people say that they're working on a brand, the idea that it's fake is also kind of a misnomer because, you know, we'll talk extensively about this when we get to some theory issues, but to say that like just because, for instance, you go on social media and you only show certain parts of yourself, that's fake. I don't really buy that. I can't think of a time in our lives that we're not doing that. We're always, you know, if you think about the self as having multiple components to it, as if you have multiple pieces to yourself, you're always going through life trying to figure out which ones you want to show and which ones you don't want to show. I think that act is an act of branding, right? You're making deliberate decisions, whether it's here or outside of social media, because here is social media. We are in social media right now. We're always making these deliberate decisions about, you know, which parts of ourselves to convey. And I think that is to some level branding. And yeah, it can be more deliberate or less deliberate. But I think I don't think it's fair to think about that sort of activity, if you are doing it deliberately, as anything that's fake. I think it's what we kind of do naturally. And, you know, there are all sorts of reasons people would want to create sort of a personal brand. Not just, I mean, again, listen, it is, I keep like kind of poo-pooing this because I want people who aren't using social media for professional reasons to feel comfortable in this class. But the truth is like, even if you're not using social media to kind of like up your game or make yourself more marketable and more attractive to job seekers or sorry, employers or whatever, there are other reasons that your reading points out on self-branding, that your reading points out that people would want to do this. One is sometimes you just want to brand for your social network, right? Because you want to fit in and you want to get likes from your friends and things like that. You want your friends to be able to come to, you know, your platforms and have a good time or get whatever they're expecting, to maybe take content from you or whatever. And the other is, I think there's self-benefits to it, right? It's a form of self-expression, sort of cultivating a personal brand. And there's a lot of creativity behind it. So I don't think, again, this is just a conversation for people who are interested in using social media for professional reasons. The other point I want to bring up about personal brands, though, is the truth is that as hard as you work at cultivating, you know, some sort of consistent experience or feeling that you want to convey using your social media platforms, you're not in complete control of it. And that was a really important thing that I thought was brought up by that study because, you know, other people can post on your wall, other people can share content, other people can tag you in their photos. So on some level, there's always like this conflict, right, with like what you want the world to see you as and then what your friends are showing you as, right? Although it doesn't necessarily have to be a conflict if you're comfortable with all that, if all of that's part of your brand. But I do think it's important to have, you know, an acknowledgement that you can you can really try hard to sort of control the image that you put out there. But the interesting thing is about social media is like you really have to be on your toes in order to have complete control over that operation. But that's not necessarily the end of the world because again, like when my friends tag me in things, it's fine. I think it's kind of part of the whole process. Okay, so what I want you to start doing in this worksheet is thinking about what your brand is. You're going to do a brand audit, kind of, not really, but kind of like what was in the study that you read, except they did this really cool thing, right, where they had other people look at your social media information and say what they thought your brand was, and then bring that to you and say like, well, what do you think about this? I'm not going to have you do that. As cool as it would be if we had an in-person class, I would 100% have you do that. I'd have you all look at each other's social media and then come back, and maybe it would be blind, feelings wouldn't get hurt, and then people sort of say like, okay, who is this person, what are they conveying based on, you know, what their social media is, what's their brand. In this case, I just want you to be a little self-reflective. Just again, I understand that most of you have not been trying to cultivate a brand, but I want you to say like, if you just looked at my across my social media platforms, maybe if you're like me, like I usually only use Facebook now. Years ago it was different, but now I'm just Facebook. So that's the only platform. If you look all the way down my thread, I would have to say like, well, what do I think what am I conveying? What sort of experience am I sort of consistently offering people who look at my content? And I would have to say, I mean, I'm kitschy, political. I would say kitschy, political, silly, and sarcastic. I am very snarky, political, snarky, silly. There's a lot of that. Political, snarky, silly. That's good. Oh, and then I post a ton of stuff about my pugs and now my chickens. Kitschy, maybe. Political, snarky, kitschy. What was the other one? I can't remember. Anyway, you get my point. Like that's what I would say. Maybe I'm wrong, by the way. And I'm giving you an opportunity. If you don't have any social media presence, you're allowed to analyze mine, but you can't use what I just said. You have to come up with other words for my brand if you do that. And the other option is if you don't want to analyze your own social media or you don't want to analyze mine, I think I gave you the opportunity to go and find somebody else's to analyze. But I don't know, read the worksheet, but that's what I'm looking for. But I want you to pull in different reasons for why you say, you know, this person's brand is kitsch or whatever. Like, what are they doing that's making you say that? Is it something they're doing, or is it something that you see other people posting about them, right? I want you to take really a full look at everything. And it's even more interesting if you can go across platforms. Some people convey something very different on Twitter than they do, for instance, on Instagram, right? Totally normal, but I want you to take it all in and just, you know, very briefly piece apart where you're getting those impressions from, what you think those brands are. So we'll call it an audit, but it's not really an audit. It's much more friendly than that. Okay, I'm actually super looking forward to reading those. And yeah, I think that's it. Brands, personal brands, go.